The morning fog hung thick over San Francisco Bay as Captain Sarah Chen guided her sleek 40-foot yacht through the choppy waters. The vessel, named Silent Thunder, cut through the waves with precision that spoke of an experienced hand at the helm. Sarah had been looking forward to this solo sailing trip for months, a chance to escape the weight of memories that had been crushing her spirit. At 38, Sarah carried herself with a quiet confidence that most people mistook for simple self-assurance. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her weathered hands moved across the controls with the kind of muscle memory that came from years of handling far more complex machinery under much more dangerous circumstances. Today, she wore simple civilian clothes, jeans, a navy sweater, and deck shoes, looking like any other weekend sailor enjoying the California coast. What the casual observer couldn't see were the scars that crisscrossed her back and arms, souvenirs from missions in places most people couldn't pronounce. They couldn't see the way her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, a habit ingrained from years of watching for threats that could emerge from any direction. Most importantly, they couldn't see the small leather wallet tucked carefully in her jacket pocket, containing credentials that would make most military personnel stand at attention. Sarah had retired from active duty 18 months ago, though retired wasn't exactly accurate. She had been medically discharged after a mission in Eastern Europe went sideways, leaving her with a shattered left leg and psychological wounds that ran even deeper. The leg had healed, but the nightmares still came most nights, along with the crushing weight of survivor's guilt that no amount of therapy seemed to lift. The yacht had been her father's before he passed away last year. Admiral Thomas Chen had been a Navy man through and through, and he had left his daughter the boat with a note that simply said, "For when you need to find your way back to yourself." Sarah hadn't understood what he meant then, but as she felt the salt spray on her face and listened to the rhythmic sound of waves against the hull, she was beginning to get an inkling. She had been sailing for 3 hours when she noticed the Coast Guard cutter approaching from her port side. The white vessel with its distinctive orange stripe was still about half a mile away. But Sarah's trained eye immediately recognized the purposeful way it was closing the distance. Her stomach tightened as she watched the approaching boat. She had all her paperwork in order, registration, safety equipment certificates. Everything was current and properly filed. Still, something about their approach set off alarm bells in her head. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see crew members moving around the deck of the Coast Guard vessel. The boat was a response boat medium, about 45 feet long, designed for search and rescue operations as well as law enforcement. As it drew closer, she could make out at least 6 crew members, more than would typically be aboard for a routine safety inspection. The radio crackled to life, cutting through the sounds of wind and waves. "Motor vessel Silent Thunder. This is Coast Guard Station Golden Gate. Please respond, over." Sarah picked up the handset, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. "Coast Guard Station Golden Gate, this is Silent Thunder. Go ahead, over." "Silent Thunder, we need you to prepare for boarding. Cut your engines and stand by for approach. This is a routine compliance inspection. Over." The words were professional and by the book, but Sarah caught something in the radio operator's tone that didn't sit right with her. She had spent enough years in high-stakes situations to recognize when someone was following a script rather than conducting actual routine business. Her instincts, honed by years of operations where reading people correctly meant the difference between success and catastrophe, were telling her this was anything but routine. "Copy that." "Coast Guard, cutting engines and standing by," she replied, throttling back the yacht's twin engines until Silent Thunder began to drift with the current. As the Coast Guard vessel approached, Sarah could see the crew more clearly. The commanding officer appeared to be a lieutenant, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of crisp bearing that spoke of someone eager to prove himself. Beside him stood a senior chief, older and more weathered, who was scanning Sarah's yacht with experienced eyes. The rest of the crew consisted of younger enlisted personnel, all looking alert and professional. What struck Sarah as odd was their level of preparation. For a routine boarding, they seemed unusually focused and ready for action. The boarding party was already assembled and equipped, as if they had been planning this encounter rather than happening upon her during a routine patrol. She had been boarded by the Coast Guard before during her sailing adventures, and those encounters had always felt much more casual and impromptu. The lieutenant raised a megaphone as the two vessels closed to within 30 feet. "Silent Thunder, this is Lieutenant Morrison, United States Coast Guard. We're coming alongside for inspection. Please prepare to receive our boarding party." Sarah raised her hand in acknowledgement and moved to the side of her yacht where they would be coming aboard. She secured loose lines and made sure the deck was clear for the approaching crew members. Despite her growing suspicion that something wasn't right about this encounter, she maintained her outward composure. Years of training had taught her to control her reactions and gather information before making any decisions about how to respond. The Coast Guard vessel maneuvered skillfully alongside Silent Thunder, and Sarah had to admire the seamanship displayed by whoever was at the helm. The waters in the bay could be tricky, and bringing two boats together safely required real skill. One of the younger crew members threw her a line, which she caught and secured to a cleat on her deck. Lieutenant Morrison was the first to step aboard, followed by Senior Chief Martinez and two other crew members. The remaining personnel stayed aboard the Coast Guard vessel, keeping both boats properly positioned relative to each other. Sarah noticed that everyone who came aboard was armed with standard-issue sidearms, which was normal for Coast Guard personnel. But they also seemed more alert and ready than she would expect for a routine inspection. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Lieutenant Morrison," the officer said, extending his hand. "We appreciate your cooperation with this boarding." Sarah shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes quickly scanned her yacht's deck and cabin area. "No problem, Lieutenant. I'm Sarah Chen. What exactly brings you folks out here today?" "Routine compliance inspection," Morrison replied, though his tone suggested anything but routine. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area, and we're checking all vessels that match certain descriptions. Mind if we have a look at your documentation and safety equipment?" Sarah nodded and gestured toward the cabin. "Everything's below deck, registration's in the chart table. Safety gear is distributed according to regulations." She paused, studying the lieutenant's face. "What kind of suspicious activity are you investigating? I've been sailing these waters for 20 years and haven't noticed anything unusual." Senior Chief Martinez spoke up for the first time. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what's your background? You seem pretty calm and collected for someone who's being boarded by law enforcement." The question was casual enough, but Sarah caught the undercurrent of suspicion in the older man's voice. She had been asking herself how much to reveal about her background. Her instinct was to keep her military service private. It was none of their business, and in her experience, mentioning special operations often created more problems than it solved. People either became overly deferential or overly suspicious, and neither reaction was particularly helpful. "I've spent some time around boats and official procedures," she replied diplomatically. "My father was Navy, so I grew up understanding how these things work." Lieutenant Morrison nodded and gestured for one of his crew members to begin the inspection of the yacht's safety equipment. "We'll try to make this as quick as possible. Mind if we take a look below deck?" "Go ahead," Sarah said, stepping back to give them room to access the cabin. "Everything should be in order." As the Coast Guard crew began their inspection, Sarah found herself studying their behavior more carefully. The two younger crew members were thorough in their examination of her safety equipment, checking her life jackets, flares, fire extinguisher, and radio equipment with professional competence. But Lieutenant Morrison and Senior Chief Martinez seemed more interested in other aspects of her yacht. The lieutenant was spending considerable time examining her navigation equipment, including the GPS system and chart plotter. He was taking notes on a small pad, recording information that seemed to go well beyond what would be needed for a routine safety inspection. Meanwhile, Senior Chief Martinez was looking at areas of the boat that had nothing to do with safety compliance. The storage areas, the sleeping quarters, even the small galley. "You spend a lot of time out here alone?" Morrison asked as he examined her radio equipment. "Some," Sarah replied. "I enjoy the solitude. Good way to clear your head." "Must get expensive. Maintaining a boat like this," Martinez commented from the galley area. 40-footer in this condition doesn't come cheap." Sarah felt a familiar prickle of irritation. The questions were moving away from safety inspection territory and into areas that were none of their business. "I manage," she said simply. The inspection continued for another 15 minutes, with the Coast Guard crew being far more thorough than Sarah had ever experienced during previous boardings. They examined every piece of equipment, looked through every storage compartment, and even checked areas that had nothing to do with maritime safety regulations. Finally, Lieutenant Morrison emerged from the cabin with Sarah's registration documents in hand. His expression had changed subtly during the inspection, becoming more focused and serious. Senior Chief Martinez joined him on deck, and Sarah noticed the two men exchange a meaningful look. "Ms. Chen, I'm afraid we're going to need to escort your vessel to the Coast Guard station for a more detailed inspection," Morrison announced. "We've found some discrepancies that require further investigation." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, though she kept her expression neutral. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Everything on board is legal and properly documented." "That's what we need to determine," Morrison replied. "I'm placing this vessel under Coast Guard jurisdiction pending completion of our investigation. You'll need to follow us to Station Golden Gate." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Having her boat impounded was serious business, potentially involving thousands of dollars in fees and legal complications, even if everything was eventually cleared up. More than that, it felt like a violation of the peace she had been trying to find on the water. "Lieutenant, I have to protest this action," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm despite her growing anger. "I've cooperated fully with your inspection, and you haven't told me what specific violations you think you found. I have a right to know what I'm being accused of." Morrison's expression hardened slightly. "Ma'am, under maritime law, the Coast Guard has broad authority to inspect and detain vessels when we have reasonable suspicion of violations. The specific nature of our investigation is not something I'm required to share with you at this time." Senior Chief Martinez stepped forward, his demeanor slightly more sympathetic. "Look, Ms. Chen, the best thing you can do is cooperate with the process. If everything's on the up and up, you'll have your boat back in a few days. Fighting us on this is just going to make things more complicated." Sarah looked from one man to the other, reading the determination in their faces. She had been in enough bureaucratic tangles during her military career to know that arguing with lower-level personnel was rarely productive. At the same time, something about this entire situation felt wrong. The level of attention they were paying to her yacht, the nature of their questions, the speed with which they had moved to impoundment. None of it added up to a routine compliance inspection. "Before we proceed," Sarah said carefully, "I'd like to know who ordered this inspection. Is this a random stop or was my vessel specifically targeted for some reason?" Lieutenant Morrison hesitated for just a moment before answering. "All vessels matching certain profiles are being inspected as part of an ongoing operation. Your yacht fit the parameters we were given." "What parameters?" Sarah pressed. "I'm not authorized to discuss the details of an active investigation," Morrison replied, his tone becoming more official and distant. Sarah nodded slowly, recognizing that she wasn't going to get any more information from these men. The situation had moved beyond the point where explanation or protest would be useful. They had made their decision, and they had the legal authority to carry it out regardless of her objections. "All right," she said finally. "I'll follow you to the station. But I want this noted for the record. I'm cooperating under protest, and I believe this action is unwarranted based on the inspection you've conducted." "Noted," Morrison said crisply. "Senior Chief, make sure the documentation reflects Ms. Chen's cooperation." As the Coast Guard crew prepared to return to their vessel, Sarah felt a growing sense of unease about what lay ahead. Being processed through the Coast Guard station would involve extensive paperwork, detailed questioning, and potentially hours of bureaucratic procedures. Worse, if they decided to hold her boat for an extended investigation, she could be looking at significant financial costs and legal complications. The fog was beginning to lift as the small flotilla headed toward Coast Guard Station Golden Gate. Sarah maintained her position about 100 yards behind the Coast Guard vessel, following their prescribed course back toward shore. The familiar landmarks of San Francisco Bay passed by as they traveled, but the peaceful morning she had planned was now completely shattered. As they approached the Coast Guard station, Sarah could see additional personnel waiting on the dock. The level of activity suggested that her arrival was expected and that whatever was happening involved more than just a simple compliance issue. She began to mentally prepare herself for what was likely to be a long and unpleasant day of questioning and bureaucratic procedures. What she didn't know was that the next few hours would change everything, and that the small leather wallet in her jacket pocket was about to turn a routine detention into something far more significant than anyone aboard either vessel could have imagined. Coast Guard Station Golden Gate buzzed with activity as the two vessels approached the main dock. Sarah noticed immediately that this wasn't the usual low-key atmosphere she remembered from previous visits to Coast Guard facilities. Personnel moved with purpose across the complex, and she counted at least 3 additional response boats tied up at the pier, along with what appeared to be a larger cutter in the background. As Lieutenant Morrison guided his vessel to the dock, Sarah saw a small group of officials waiting for their arrival. Among them stood a woman in Coast Guard dress blues with commander's stripes, flanked by 2 men in civilian clothes who had the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. The sight of the brass waiting for what was supposedly a routine boarding made Sarah's suspicions crystallize into certainty. She had stumbled into something much larger than a simple compliance check. "Silent Thunder, berth at Dock 7, came the radio instruction. "Shut down all systems and prepare for escort to processing." Sarah guided her yacht to the designated berth, her mind racing through possible explanations for the level of attention she was receiving. The most likely scenario was that her boat matched the description of a vessel involved in some kind of criminal activity. Drug running was always a possibility in these waters, though her yacht was hardly inconspicuous enough for serious smuggling operations. More troubling was the thought that someone might have used her boat's description or registration in some kind of false flag operation. As she secured Silent Thunder to the dock, the welcoming committee approached. The commander stepped forward first, her expression professional but not unfriendly. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent on the water. "Ms. Chen, I'm Commander Elizabeth Hayes, Station Commander for Golden Gate," the woman said, extending her hand. "I apologize for the circumstances of your arrival, but we have some questions that need to be answered." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "Commander, I appreciate your courtesy, but I have to say I'm confused about what's happening here. Your people haven't told me what specific violations they think they've found." "Let's discuss this inside," Commander Hayes replied. "These gentlemen are Agent Rodriguez and Agent Kim from Homeland Security. They've been coordinating with us on an ongoing investigation." The mention of Homeland Security sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Whatever this was about, it had moved far beyond maritime safety violations. Homeland Security involvement suggested terrorism, human trafficking, or some other serious federal crime. She found herself running through her recent activities, trying to think of anything that could have drawn this level of attention. "Am I under arrest?" Sarah asked directly. "No, you're not under arrest," Agent Rodriguez replied. He was a compact man in his 30s with intelligent eyes and the kind of careful manner that suggested extensive interview training. "We're hoping you can help us with some information about your vessel's movements over the past few months." "We appreciate your cooperation," Agent Kim added. He was taller and younger than his partner, with the slightly nervous energy of someone who was still relatively new to federal law enforcement. "This shouldn't take too long if you can answer our questions." Sarah nodded slowly. "I'll cooperate, but I want to understand what I'm being accused of. If my boat was involved in something illegal, it happened without my knowledge." Commander Hayes gestured toward the main building. "Let's head to the conference room where we can discuss this properly." The group made their way across the busy dock area. Sarah noted the increased security presence, more armed personnel than she would expect at a Coast Guard station, plus what appeared to be additional federal agents positioned at strategic points around the facility. Whatever investigation she had stumbled into was clearly significant. The conference room was spartanly furnished with a metal table, several chairs, and a wall-mounted monitor. Agent Rodriguez gestured for Sarah to take a seat, while Agent Kim set up what appeared to be a digital recording device. Commander Hayes remained standing near the door, observing but not actively participating in the questioning. "Ms. Chen, before we begin, I want to make it clear that you have the right to have an attorney present during this interview," Agent Rodriguez said formally. "You're not under arrest, but anything you say could potentially be used in legal proceedings." Sarah considered the offer carefully. Her instinct was to cooperate and get this resolved quickly, but the involvement of Homeland Security suggested she might be in deeper water than she realized. On the other hand, asking for a lawyer might make her look guilty of something she knew nothing about. "I'll answer your questions," she said finally. "But I reserve the right to stop this interview if I feel I need legal representation." "Fair enough," Rodriguez replied, activating the recording device. "This is Agent Rodriguez, Homeland Security Investigations, conducting an interview with Sarah Chen regarding vessel registration number CF3847ZW, the yacht Silent Thunder. Present are Agent Kim, HSI, and Commander Hayes, U.S. Coast Guard. Ms. Chen, please state your full name and relationship to the vessel in question." "Sarah Michelle Chen. I'm the registered owner of the yacht Silent Thunder." "How long have you owned this vessel?" "About 18 months. I inherited it from my father when he passed away." Agent Kim leaned forward slightly. "What was your father's name and what was his background?" "Admiral Thomas Chen, U.S. Navy. He served for 35 years before retiring in 2019. Sarah noticed both agents exchange a quick glance at this information. Commander Hayes also straightened slightly at the mention of her father's rank. The reaction suggested this wasn't the background they had been expecting. "Ms. Chen, what's your own background?" Rodriguez asked. "Current employment, military service, that kind of thing." Sarah hesitated for a moment. She had been hoping to keep her military service out of this conversation, but their reaction to her father's background suggested that might not be possible. "I'm currently unemployed. I served in the military for 15 years before being medically retired last year." "What branch and what was your specialty?" "Army," Sarah replied carefully. "Special operations." Again, the agents exchanged looks. Agent Kim made a note on his pad while Rodriguez continued the questioning. "Can you be more specific about your special operations background?" Sarah felt the familiar reluctance to discuss her service record with outsiders. "I'd prefer not to get into specifics. Most of my service record is classified, and I'm not comfortable sharing operational details." "Ms. Chen, we're not asking for classified information," Rodriguez said. "We just need to understand your background as it relates to our investigation." Sarah took a deep breath, weighing her options. "I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 8 years, then spent 7 years with a classified unit under Joint Special Operations Command. I was medically retired following injuries sustained during a mission in Eastern Europe." The room fell silent for a moment as the implications of her background sank in. Commander Hayes moved away from the wall and took a seat at the table, her expression now showing considerably more respect and curiosity. "Ms. Chen," Agent Kim said slowly, "when you say classified unit under JSOS, are you referring to—" He paused, apparently uncertain how to phrase the question. "I can't discuss specific unit designations or operational details," Sarah replied firmly. "What I can tell you is that I held a top-secret clearance with multiple compartmented accesses, and my service record includes deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several other locations I'm not authorized to discuss." Agent Rodriguez set down his pen and studied Sarah with new interest. "This changes things significantly. Miss Chen, the reason we're here is that your vessel was photographed meeting with another boat 3 weeks ago off the Marin Headlands. That boat was later intercepted carrying approximately 200 kilograms of heroin." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't met with any other boats, and I certainly haven't been involved in drug trafficking." "The photographs are quite clear," Agent Kim said, producing a manila folder from his briefcase. "Your yacht is clearly identifiable by its registration numbers and distinctive hull design." He spread several black and white photographs across the table. Sarah leaned forward to examine them, her heart pounding as she looked at clear images of her yacht alongside a smaller fishing boat. The photos showed people moving between the two vessels, apparently transferring cargo. "This isn't possible," Sarah said, studying the images more carefully. "When were these taken?" 3 weeks ago, approximately 2 a.m., about 5 miles off the Marine coast," Rodriguez replied. "We've had your boat under surveillance since then, waiting for the right moment to make contact." Sarah's mind raced as she stared at the photographs. The boat was definitely Silent Thunder. The registration numbers were clearly visible, and she recognized every detail of her yacht's profile. But she had been nowhere near the Marine Headlands 3 weeks ago. "Agent Rodriguez, 3 weeks ago I was in San Diego visiting my mother. I can provide hotel receipts, credit card records, anything you need to verify that. My boat was moored at Marina del Rey the entire time I was gone." Commander Hayes spoke up for the first time since the interview began. "Ms. Chen, are you certain about those dates? This is important." "Absolutely certain. My mother was having surgery for a hip replacement. I was there for 5 days, from the 15th to the 20th of last month. I can prove it." Agent Kim frowned, flipping through the papers in his folder. "The photographs were taken on the morning of October 18th. "Then someone else was using my boat," Sarah said firmly, "because I was definitely in San Diego that night." "Ms. Chen," Rodriguez said slowly, "do you have any idea how someone could have gained access to your yacht? Where do you normally keep it moored?" "Alameda Marina, Slip 247. It's a secure facility, but—" Sarah paused, thinking. "But if someone really wanted to take it, they could probably manage it. The marina has security cameras, though." "We'll need to check those records," Agent Kim said, making another note. "Is there anyone else who has access to your boat? Keys, security codes, anything like that?" Sarah shook her head. "No one. I'm very careful about that. After what I've been through in the military, I don't trust people easily." Commander Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah's face. "Ms. Chen, assuming your alibi checks out, this suggests someone specifically targeted your vessel for use in this operation. Given your background, that's extremely concerning from a security standpoint." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand the implications. "Someone with your clearance level and operational background being targeted by drug traffickers suggests a level of sophistication we don't usually see," Agent Rodriguez explained. "Most smugglers don't do detailed background checks on the boat owners they're impersonating." Agent Kim nodded grimly. "This could be intelligence gathering for something much larger than drug running. Foreign intelligence services, terrorist organizations, organized crime syndicates. Any of them would find value in having detailed information about someone with your background." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as the full implications hit her. You think this was surveillance? Someone was using my boat to test security responses while gathering intelligence about me? It's possible, Commander Hayes replied. And if that's the case, we need to determine who's behind it and what their ultimate objective might be. Agent Rodriguez stood up from the table. Ms. Chen, I think we need to step back and reconsider this entire situation. If you were targeted specifically because of your background, this investigation just became a matter of national security. What does that mean for me? Sarah asked. For now, it means we need to verify your alibi and start looking at this from a completely different angle, Kim replied. Your boat may have been used as a prop in a much larger operation. Commander Hayes activated her radio. Security office, this is the commander. I need a secure conference call with District 11 Intelligence immediately. Priority 1. As the implications of the situation began to sink in, Sarah realized that her quiet retirement had just come to an abrupt end. Someone had deliberately involved her in an operation that threatened not just her personal security, but potentially national security as well. The questions now were who was behind it, why they had chosen her specifically, and what they were really after. Agent Rodriguez sat back down across from her. Ms. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. In the past year since your retirement, have you noticed anything unusual? People asking questions about you, strangers in your neighborhood, anything that seemed out of place? Sarah considered the question seriously. There have been a few things. Phone calls where no one spoke when I answered. A couple of times I felt like I was being followed. But I chalked it up to paranoia from my service experiences. We're going to need details about all of that, Kim said. Dates, descriptions, anything you can remember. As Sarah began to recount the subtle signs she had dismissed over the past months, she realized that what she had attributed to post-service adjustment issues might have been something far more sinister. Someone had been watching her, studying her habits, and using that information to plan an operation that could have destroyed her life. The question was whether this was the end of their interest in her, or just the beginning of something much more dangerous. The secure conference room buzzed with tension as additional federal agents arrived at Coast Guard Station Golden Gate. Sarah found herself at the center of what had rapidly escalated into a multi-agency operation involving not just Homeland Security and the Coast Guard, but also representatives from the FBI and Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Agent Rodriguez returned to the room carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the grim expression of someone who had just received very bad news. Ms. Chen, we've verified your alibi. Hotel records, security camera footage, and credit card transactions all confirm you were in San Diego during the time period in question. That's good news, right? Sarah asked, though the faces around the conference table suggested otherwise. It confirms you weren't directly involved in the drug operation, Agent Kim replied. But it also confirms that someone went to considerable trouble to steal and use your boat for criminal activity. That level of planning suggests a much more serious threat. Commander Hayes spread additional photographs across the table. These are from the marina security cameras at Alameda. They show two individuals boarding your yacht at approximately 11:30 p.m. on October 17th. Sarah studied the grainy black and white images. The camera angle and nighttime lighting made it difficult to see faces clearly, but she could make out two figures dressed in dark clothing moving purposefully across the dock toward her boat. One appeared to be carrying a bag that could have contained tools or equipment. Professional work, observed Agent Susan Martinez from NCIS, a woman in her 40s with the sharp eyes of someone who had spent years investigating complex criminal operations. They knew exactly where the cameras were positioned and how to minimize their exposure. These aren't amateur boat thieves. FBI agent David Park, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier, pointed to details in the photographs. Look at their movement patterns. They're maintaining tactical spacing, checking corners using hand signals. This is either military or intelligence-trained personnel. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease as she studied the images. How did they get past Marina security? Alameda has guards, locked gates, the whole 9 yards. We're investigating that, Rodriguez replied. But given the sophistication we're seeing, they probably had inside help or extremely good intelligence about the facility's security procedures. Agent Martinez opened a laptop and turned it toward Sarah. Ms. Chen, we need you to look at something. This is a list of everyone who had access to your personnel file during your military service. We're trying to determine if someone with knowledge of your background might have been involved in targeting you. The screen showed a lengthy database query result with hundreds of names, ranks, and access dates spanning her 15-year career. Sarah scanned through the entries, seeing familiar names from her various units and assignments, as well as administrative personnel she had never heard of. This is going to take hours to go through properly, Sarah said, but I can tell you that most of these people are either dead, retired, or still serving with honor. The idea that someone from my past is involved in this doesn't feel right. Agent Park leaned forward. What about foreign intelligence services? During your deployments, did you encounter situations where enemy forces might have gathered intelligence about you personally? Sarah considered the question carefully. It's possible. We operated in environments where the enemy was sophisticated enough to conduct detailed surveillance. But most of our operational security was designed to prevent exactly this kind of compromise. Most operational security has weaknesses, Commander Hayes observed, especially when dealing with adversaries who have unlimited time and resources to exploit them. Agent Rodriguez received a call on his secure phone and stepped away from the table to take it. When he returned, his expression was even more serious than before. We just got results from the forensic examination of your boat. Ms. Chen, whoever used your yacht installed sophisticated surveillance equipment throughout the vessel. What kind of surveillance equipment? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. Audio and video recording devices, GPS tracking that bypasses your normal navigation system, and what appears to be equipment designed to monitor and record radio communications, Kim replied. Everything was professionally installed and would be virtually undetectable during normal use. Agent Martinez pulled up another screen on her laptop. The equipment is high-end stuff, not the kind of thing you can buy at an electronics store. This is military or intelligence-grade surveillance technology. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. How long has it been there? Based on the installation methods and component analysis, probably 6 to 8 months, Park replied. Someone has been monitoring your activities for a significant period of time. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. For months, every conversation on her boat, every trip she had taken, every personal moment she had experienced aboard Silent Thunder had been recorded and transmitted to unknown parties. The violation felt almost as traumatic as the injuries that had ended her military career. Why? She asked quietly. What could they possibly want from me? I'm retired, medically disabled, and I haven't had access to classified information for over a year. Agent Rodriguez exchanged glances with his colleagues before answering. Ms. Chen, there are several possibilities. Foreign intelligence services often maintain long-term surveillance of former special operations personnel, hoping to gather intelligence about methods, capabilities, or personnel. Organized crime groups sometimes target people with your background for recruitment or elimination if they view you as a threat. There's another possibility, Agent Martinez added grimly. Terrorist organizations have shown increasing interest in former military personnel, either for recruitment purposes or as potential targets for high-profile attacks. Commander Hayes stood up from the table and walked to the window overlooking the bay. Miss Chen, given the level of sophistication we're seeing and the length of time you've been under surveillance, we believe you're in immediate danger. We're recommending that you enter protective custody while we investigate this further. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Protective custody? For how long? Until we can identify and neutralize the threat, Agent Park replied. This could take weeks or months depending on what we find. Sarah stared out the window at San Francisco Bay, watching civilian boats moving peacefully across the water. The life she had been trying to rebuild after her military retirement was collapsing around her, replaced by the same kind of high-stakes danger she had hoped to leave behind forever. I need to think about this, she said finally. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. Ms. Chen, I understand this is overwhelming, but we don't think you have the luxury of time. Whoever has been watching you knows by now that their operation has been compromised. That makes you either a liability they need to eliminate or an asset they need to secure. Either way, you're in danger, Kim added. Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the small leather wallet she had been carrying. For the first time since the investigation began, she opened it and placed it on the conference table. The room fell silent as the federal agents and Coast Guard personnel stared at the credentials inside. The black leather case contained Sarah's military identification, but not the standard ID card carried by most service members. Instead, it held a special access badge marked with the seal of the Joint Special Operations Command and clearance indicators that made everyone in the room straighten up slightly. Commander Hayes was the first to speak. Ms. Chen, this changes everything. Why didn't you show us this earlier? Because I hoped it wouldn't be necessary, Sarah replied. And because once people see credentials like these, they start making assumptions about capabilities and threats that may not be accurate anymore. Agent Martinez picked up the credential holder and examined it carefully. Elite Forces Special Access. I've only seen a few of these in my entire career. Ms. Chen, what exactly was your role in JSOC? Sarah took a deep breath. I was part of a direct action unit that specialized in high-value target elimination and sensitive site exploitation. For 7 years, I operated in some of the most dangerous environments in the world, conducting missions that most people will never hear about. And someone with knowledge of that background has been surveilling you for months, Agent Park said quietly. This isn't about drug trafficking or even organized crime. This is about someone who wants access to one of the most highly trained and experienced special operations personnel in the military. Agent Rodriguez closed the credential case and handed it back to Sarah. Ms. Chen, we're not just recommending protective custody anymore. We're insisting on it. You're not just a potential victim. You're a national security asset that cannot be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of the federal agents and military personnel who were trying to protect her. She recognized the expression she saw there, the same combination of respect and concern she had seen countless times during her military career when dealing with high-stakes situations where failure was not an option. All right, she said finally, but I want to be involved in the investigation. I'm not going to sit in some safe house while other people try to figure out who's been violating my privacy and threatening my security. Commander Hayes smiled slightly. Ms. Chen, given your background, I don't think anyone expected you to take a passive role in your own protection. Agent Rodriguez activated his secure phone. I'll contact the deputy director and brief him on the situation. This is now a Priority 1 national security investigation. As the federal agents began making calls and coordinating resources, Sarah found herself thinking about the irony of her situation. She had retired from military service hoping to find peace and anonymity, only to discover that her past had been following her all along. The skills and training that had made her valuable to the military had also made her a target for unknown enemies. Looking out at San Francisco Bay, where this whole ordeal had begun just hours earlier, Sarah realized that her quiet retirement was over. Whether she liked it or not, she was back in the world of shadows and threats that she had tried so hard to leave behind. But this time, she wouldn't be facing the danger alone. and she would be fighting not just for mission success, but for the right to live her life on her own terms. The investigation into who had been watching her and why would likely take months to resolve. But as she studied the faces of the professionals who were now working to protect her, Sarah felt a familiar sense of purpose beginning to stir. She had been a victim of surveillance and manipulation, but she was also a highly trained operator with the skills to fight back. Whoever had made the mistake of targeting her was about to learn that former elite forces personnel never truly retire. They just wait for the right mission to bring them back into action.